Welcome to Press Review, the reaction show where we discuss the stories that have grabbed us this week from global media. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button and like this video. And also, if you want to get my weekly newsletter on politics and so much more, then please go to the site below and become a subscriber or member of Reaction. I'm joined by Maggie Pagano and Alastair Benn, my colleagues from Reaction. I think this week we've got stories on the energy crisis, greenery, what's happening in global supply chains, China, James Bond, of course, billionaires, and the Metropolitan Police. Maggie, I'm firstly going to kick off with you. Your first story, I think, is from the Telegraph.
It is. It's by Rachel Millard. It's on the front of the business section. And as we know, energy's been the hot subject all week. And it appears that the government has decided, on top of gas prices reaching record highs, that they want to put a higher tax on gas bills. And this is because at the moment, 25% of overall heating has the tax element to help fund, more renewables, but gas only has about 6%. So they want to whack it on gas to try and force people to buy these incredibly expensive and inefficient heat pumps. Now, this seems to be an extraordinary, certainly in terms of timing, absolute madness on the part of the government, because number one, to have the heat pumps, they cost between 10 and 16,000. They're not very efficient. You need land to do it. 23 million homes in Britain have gas as their main source of electricity and heating. So how on earth are they going to be able to install these heat pumps? I mean, it's just not joined up thinking.
And it was on the Telegraph business section. It's interesting, isn't it? The Telegraph is really on the case of the UK government about this because COP26 is coming up. The whole agenda is supposed to be decarbonisation, getting industry ready for net zero, but there's this energy crunch ongoing, with on petrol with the UK with queues, concerns about soaring prices, prices having gone through the roof in Europe and elsewhere. It has felt, hasn't it, this week like a bit of a shift in terms of how this stuff is reported, that we're moving out of a more comfortable age and into an era of scarcity.
Absolutely. And it does appear that the government have probably for the first time realized that their entire energy policy needs to be certainly updated, and that over the long term, for example, nuclear power stations are back on the grid, so to speak, with several proposals to build new nuclear. And I think they've realized that quite apart whether you like nuclear or not, if they want to achieve net zero, they've actually got to have about 10 times the capacity of nuclear to get to that. It can't be done without it. It simply can't. Because we have 20% of all electricity supplied by nuclear at the moment. That's going to be by half over the next few years. That will be halved. And there is nothing there that can make up for that shortfall.
Yeah. Because there's new nuclear coming, isn't there, in a few years' time? But we're going to be very lucky if it arrives in time, especially with winters just around the corner. And then
that's 6 years away. 2026. Hinkley
But
Point.
it was illustrative, wasn't it, of the government's attitude or its approach, its short-termism, that stories suddenly appeared. I think last weekend in the Sunday press and elsewhere, saying that the government is now in favour of a new generation of mini nukes, which some people have been arguing for 15 or 20 years, but it's all happening in something of a panic. So my first choice is from the Times. My colleague Simon Nixon. Now it's a really interesting take on all of this and take on the trends underpinning this new era of global economics. The piece is navigating a new world as self-sufficiency replaces globalization. So he presents this as almost the end of the era where countries in the West could rely on ever cheaper flows of goods and trade was always liberalizing, and that we're moving partly because of the pandemic, and we discovered with shortages of medical supplies, the race for vaccines, PPE, all of that, that you needed to be able to produce closer to home. And it's such a smart piece, in which he of course presents. There's also an opportunity in this, which I think is is really interesting. It's the fragmentation of the global economy, and the move towards national resilience is going to create opportunities for companies who have done what he describes as vertical integration. So they've moved away from outsourcing everything and back towards, do you have security of your own supply chain? And there was a very good example of this, wasn't there, just a few weeks ago, when there was the panic on CO2 production. You remember, around fertilizer, and a company like, I think it was Heineken, the brewer, which didn't have a problem because it had seen several years ago a potential shortage coming down the line and had built its own production facility. So Maggie, business is going to change.
Business is changing rapidly. They are looking, going back to the energy for a moment. I mean, quite apart from supply, security is a big issue. We depend so much on Russia. And as we've seen, Russia is basically at war with the EU, trying to get Nord Stream in, so it can switch off the tap, prices go up. I think business is going to have to become far more resilient. We saw it with PPE equipment during the pandemic. We relied on China for 90%, I think, of all that we consume. So this is an argument that people have been having since the 1980s, isn't it? We have to have a stronger manufacturing. It can't all be Tony Blair's the great dream was value added, high tech. Well, that's great, but we do need to have some very basic functions, like the gas storage. They didn't repair the gas storage place up in Rough.
Yeah.
Years ago. Quite basic elements that need to be.
Yeah, Simon Nixon flags up a new book called The Age of Unpeace by Mark Leonard, who's the director of the European Council for Foreign Relations. And it's about explaining how an increasingly interconnected world, far from it becoming a source of global peace and stability, as used to be assumed, is now a source of global tension. And as Simon says, instead, the world is becoming fragmented as governments conclude that every link in the chain of globalization has become a potential vulnerability that can be exploited by an adversary. What does that mean, Alastair, do you think, in terms of how politics is changing or going to change, this new emphasis that I think is inevitable on resilience?
Well, we're already seeing that manifest in the kind of where that kind of concern is kind of manifests most starkly. It's in defence, in our security. Already, the deal between France and Greece, not covered, I think, that much in the British press, is a huge deal in terms of like growing allied capacity between those two countries. And it's the same is true of AUKUS. It's sort of realizing that the penny has dropped in terms of, how things interlink. It's all very well for people at the top of, for example, the kind of European sort of mons, like the top bureaucrats and politicians, to say Europe is a world leader in the technologies of the future. But without like a strong security apparatus, that is meaningless. Undersea cables need to be protected by submarines or by whatever. All the things that we take for granted are real, physical, material things. They're not, they're not sort of. I think that's. We published a piece in Engelsberg Ideas, which is a site we run, by Helen Thompson last week, who's a new Statesman contributor and a political scientist, where she argued that one of the great illusions of the modern age was generated by the fact that coal, the actual real material production of energy through coal, was in a sense for decades sort of off stage left, because the end point is bright electricity and bright lights, and the sophisticated transport infrastructure and all that, and that's created a kind of sort of problem for us, in that we're not accustomed to thinking about the things we use day to day as stuff which has like a basis in like kind of prosaic concerns about order, security, all that. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying, in security, you're seeing it happen. It's going to come into all kinds of other things like energy and food and all the rest.
It was a good piece by Helen Thompson. Another piece from Engelsberg Ideas that, as you say, it's a site that is produced by the Reaction team, and see the link below. Was a piece by Oliver Rhodes about the sovereign individual, which I have to say I also referenced in my column in the Times this week, which is a hugely influential book from the 1990s. 1997 it was published, co-authored by William Rhys-Mogg, former editor of the Times, and in some ways it's very prescient. That book is described as the most influential and important book you've never read. I read it at the time and found parts of it persuasive, and it's worth going back to, as Oliver says, because the vision painted was borne out, which is that the internet is incredibly powerful and important in disrupting society and economics. But the vision that they paint of borders dissolving, nation states almost dissolving, turns out to be complete hokum. And actually, post-pandemic, the shift has been back towards the nation state. Maybe even kind of began in the UK with the Brexit shift, and now for vaccines, well, we look to scientists, but scientists are licensed by politicians and partly paid for by taxpayers. So the nation state is very much back. Speaking of powerful nation states, Maggie, your next choice is about China, and which strikes me as the most interesting non-domestic story of the moment. I just can't get enough of reading about China, and you wrote about it for Reaction this week as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I won't cite one particular article, but I've been following the brilliant energy correspondent at Bloomberg, Javier Blas, and also John Kemp at Reuters. They both have really been on the money, as they say, on this for weeks. So what's happening in China is sort of almost exactly what Alastair was just talking about. China, 60% of all the energy consumed in China comes from coal. They have about 90% of it locally sourced, and they depend about 10% on Australian coal. So what's happened is they're in dispute with the Australians for all the obvious reasons. So the coal hasn't come from Australia. They've had to import it from Russia and other countries. Now, this sort of shortage of coal happened at the same time as China emerged from the pandemic, huge demand from around the world, pent-up demand for its exports. So they had to start producing about 10 to 20% more, but they had a shortfall of coal. And a lot of the factories they're basic things. They couldn't work on the Russian coal. They had to change the equipment. So, sort of basic things like that they've had to adapt. Meanwhile, coal soars in price. It's now $212. And they've now got a power crunch throughout the country, certainly in the north, the south, and in the north, it's because of the coal shortage. In the south, actually, it's hydroelectric power. And they've had very light rainfall, so there isn't enough hydropower. So they've been sort of, pincer movement. And what's, the big question, and it really is quite severe, because some factories have been asked to close for 10 to 20 days a month. They're turning off air conditioning in factories and offices. This is quite severe. And the other reason is that the CCP only give a certain amount of coal that can be produced. It's controlled, it's regulated very tightly by the state. So they're having to look to unravel that. And I suppose from our point of view, the question is, what impact will this have on exports reaching the West? What impact it can have on inflationary pressures here? What is this saying? The butterfly wings spread chaos. And I think it's one of those. But I mean, the interesting thing is, we look at our domestic market where we see gas prices going up, but actually this is a worldwide phenomena provoked first by the pandemic, but secondly, just quickly, what's happened in the mad rush to build renewables. We've seen a lot of the big oil and gas companies, BP, Shell, Exxon, they've been selling off assets so that they can invest in solar, which is great, but it means that a lot of the old fossil fuel storage and plants have not been invested in. So at a time when you need more, we haven't got it. So there's this mismatch. An analyst said, it's the new economy having the old economy having revenge on the new.
Yeah, and in UK terms, it's only 5-6 weeks from COP26, the great climate change jamboree being held in Glasgow, and so much of the UK press now is dominated by stories about shortages, pressures on energy supply, and what's happening to the global economy. I mean, the thing I'm fascinated by but can't quite figure out, reading lots of economists and in various places on this, but obviously what's happening in China, where they've had a huge surge in production, or attempted to have a huge surge in production, because the global economy is coming roaring back, which has then increased the demand for energy and then hit these problems. But as they can't produce in the same way, they obviously can't. That hits Chinese growth, which has an interesting impact on the global economy. It also hits the demand for exports from places like Germany to China, which a country like Germany is then depending on China coming roaring back. So it's a great disruption, and can be going to be a big feature of the next 6 months to a year. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, just click the button below and also like this video. And you can go to the link to the Reaction site below, where you get my weekly newsletter, Maggie's column. You get all of the brilliant work done by the Reaction team. You become a member of Reaction and get invites to our live events, which are back on again soon. Alastair, yours is the next choice, which is, now we said in the previous episode, but you weren't on the previous episode, we said we were going to ban mentions of the New Statesman, because we have, I think in most episodes of late, we've had a piece cited from the New Statesman, but this is a piece that you've chosen, so we're going to let you away with it, and it's a writer who I always pay attention to. Alastair, what's your choice?
So it's the Bruno Macaes. He's an ex-Europe minister for Portugal, and he's written a few books, one on the civilizational states, and various books on geopolitics. And yeah, he's always worth listening to. Quite a spiky character on Twitter. Quite good at turning a phrase. And he's written an essay for the New Statesman, which I think is characteristic of how he writes. I mean, it's entitled "The Spirit of the Age: Why the Tech Billionaires Want to Leave Humanity Behind," and it's about Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and various others of these kinds of new titans of American capitalism. Making plans to find immortality, go to space, conquer the universe, all that stuff that we've seen in the last couple of months. Blue Origin from Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, his company Neuralink, which is going to apparently wire us up into our brains into some technological mainframe. I don't know, but it's an interesting essay, in which he basically argues that if you don't take tech billionaires' personal aspirations seriously, you are missing a fundamental sort of part of life as it is, and what's going to happen in the future. If you don't take them seriously and don't take them at face value, it's like you're in the 19th century and you're not taking, at face value, or the 20th century, you're not taking Che Guevara at its face value, you're not taking Osama bin Laden at face value. And, I've got, and he kind of references Hegel, the German philosopher Hegel's response to Napoleon in the 19th century, where Hegel watches Napoleon sort of ride off and describes him as the world spirit in action. And Bruno, in his conversations with tech billionaires like Peter Thiel, is saying that these guys are serious about immortality, about conquering space, and they have the capacity to do so, and the kind of raw talent and ambition and resources to do that. Now, I agree to it. I think it's thought-provoking, but I've always quite liked it. I would have liked in the essay a bit more pessimism and a bit more kind of
but also realism
in the other direction.
But also realism, Alastair, about how history works, and quite often because of the tricks that celebrity plays, quite often the people who at the time seem destined to be remembered or hugely important turn out not to be. I mean, I thought this during the pandemic, where quite a lot of the tech billionaires, really just their preoccupations, their posing, all suddenly looked a bit silly and inconsequential. Yes, we were using some of the tools that they'd invented or popularized to communicate and to keep society going. Of course, tech itself played a role, but I wonder if in 50 years' time, whether people will really care about, will they care about Musk? I suppose an American would say, well, maybe it's equivalent to Edison, but still the big figures from the 19th century, 20th century they tend to be statesmen and stateswomen. They tend to be people involved in diplomacy, statecraft, war, the big stuff that happens, scientists. So I'm skeptical of the idea that these are the key figures of our age, and that people will look back in 200 years' time and see it as a renaissance. But who knows? For our next choice, I'm going to choose the Playbook entry from Politico, which is the newsletter which goes out every morning, every weekday morning, from the Politico team in London. And it's with a difference this week. It's about the Sarah Everard case, which is the story is dominating the UK press. A murder which has, we're not going to use the name of the murderer, but a murder which has shocked Britain, and is now, as Playbook says, this is turning into a political story as well about policing. And the reason I highlight it is that it makes the point that for the moment, Cressida Dick, who's the head of the Metropolitan Police, has the support of the government and the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, who they quote being supportive of Cressida Dick, saying that he worked with her when in his period before he was in politics. And I just wonder, Maggie, this terrible human story, whether Cressida Dick, whether in 72 hours things might look different if there is public and media pressure.
I always find the issue of whether somebody who's been in charge of a disaster, whether it was BP and the leak in the Gulf, they say whether the person in charge who's accountable should go as the right step to if you like accept and take blame, or whether they should be forced to stay and sort it out. And at the moment, my instinct is there's actually so much going on in policing that one could criticize, from the insulate to the whatever, that I would prefer to see Dick really put in the stand, and for her to present a new way of what she believes can be done to improve policing, because it is clear that that number one, he had quite a track record. They're now saying, why was that not done? There are a very high number of sexual offenders within the police force. So I think I prefer to see her forced to clean out the police force. And, you know, women will always live in fear. And whilst I understand, certainly the younger generation who say we should not, I think it is a function of human nature that women will always be more scared than men. I don't know how we change that. But what they should be protected against the worst aggression of man. There's another issue, and that is, would he have been able to do what he did if we weren't in lockdown? And that's something a lot of people have raised with me, that we had been inculcated into such a state of fear that, you know, that Sarah was stopped and he was able to arrest her. The people who saw it didn't come forward. I think that's an impossible, and I suspect the man is so evil that he would have found another way. But, you know, it does draw on many issues. So whether she should resign, who we have, they've got to prove themselves. I'd rather see her suffer and actually explain what she's going to do to make it better. If that doesn't work, then she can go.
And it was a
very long answer.
It was a week, Maggie, in which some of the most powerful coverage was really just the words of the family themselves, which Radio 4 powerfully just ran the family's statement in full, and on Thursday morning.
I don't even know how they had the strength to appear in court. It's incredible. Yeah. Anyway,
So you're watching Reaction on YouTube, and you may be listening on podcast as well. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, hit the subscribe button below. For our final story in this edition of Press Review, the programme where we highlight the stories that have grabbed us in the last week or so globally. Alastair, your choice, and it's on James Bond.
Yeah, so it's by the Guardian's I think security and defense editor, and the title is, if I can just get it up, James Bond's mission stays the same, letting Britain think it's still a superpower, by Dan Sabbagh. It's quite, I think it's an interesting piece in that I felt it was kind of like a thought experiment, which is to say, I mean, the piece basically argues that Bond is still about a kind of post-imperial Britain attempting to project soft power when it's not doing enough in hard power terms to kind of justify that. Now, I agree, actually. You know, we're naive, and we have been for a long time, about Britain's real capabilities. Great example is Afghanistan and Iraq interventions, where I think substituted kind of real impact to being the perception that we were, you know, with the superpower of the day, and taking part in the kind of American, you know, being I think Patrick Porter, who's an academic at the University of Birmingham, wrote an amazing piece for The Critic about this. It's a long essay, I think titled "The Noise Before Defeat," where he argues that, you know, Britain has deceived itself by claiming that it can be the Greece to America's Rome. It can be the civilizing influence on American power, and that is just an illusion. And I think so. Yeah, I think he's right, but I don't think James Bond is actually the right thing to hang around that piece. It's like he's been told to write a piece on James Bond, and he's just, you know, sort of. It is true. Ian Fleming wrote those books. I mean, in my view, pretty terrible books. I mean, I read them when I was a teenager. I'm no interest in reading them again. Sort of quite good plots sometimes, but not very well written. But it is about a kind of the sick man of Europe being suave and going around the world and dealing with the supervillains and all that. And it really is of its time, of that kind of quite grim 50s era where Britain's influence looks like it's being slowly fading away. And it can, you know, Bond has a house in the Caribbean. He's glamorous. He's you know, all that. And I think that's true. But I think Bond now is much more, I mean, it's not really that at all. I think it's about the entertainment complex and a kind of.
I also think, and Maggie, I'm not sure if you've seen the film. I saw the film last night. I have to say, absolutely loved it, with some reservations, but I always have a reservation or two about a particular Bond film. But I found it, no spoilers, but I found it very, very moving. Did find it funny. And one of the key observations, as I stress, one of the key components of the film is, and no spoilers, is a recognition of, well, two things. Firstly, Britain and America are not presented as great allies in this film. So if you think back to a lot of old Bond, it's always the Americans have to turn up and help. So that's a big, I think that's a shift in the Bond story since Afghanistan and Iraq, and a recognition that the domestic audience, of course this is made for an international audience, but the domestic audience is very important for the Bond franchise, now has a slightly more ambiguous relationship with ideas of America and American strength. So the Americans are not the heroes in this Bond film, and also Britain's not presented. Dan Sabbah's wrong. Britain's not presented as a superpower in this. It's presented, I would say, pretty much as it is if you study intelligence and diplomacy. It is a top-end, medium-sized power, or sort of lower-end. It's not in the superpower class, but it's a country with significant assets in intelligence and defence, and I think quite a realistic view of its capabilities, and it does have considerable capabilities. So when you get towards the end of the film, and I stress no spoilers, the way in which the Japanese and the Russians are talked about, it's not as though the British are besting them because we're some imaginary superpower, which we're not. The British have to be nimble, that Brexit word, and have a bit of a sense of humour about our shortcomings. So I read Dan Sabbah's piece and didn't recognise the film and didn't recognise the British story. Maggie, are we just overcomplicating this? Is it just that it's supposed to be a thriller?
It's kitsch, it's funny, it's parody, it should be self-deprecating. It's what people love about the Brits, which is why I quite like the Roger Moores. You know, they were taking the piss out of themselves. And I think that, you know, if we're a superpower in being able to do that. So I just want mad adventure, lunatic, flying through the sky and all the adventurous stuff. We just want, sort of boys' adventure. That's why I watch a James Bond film, and all the sort of glamorous characters.
I've got a radical choice for the next Bond.
Who's that?
Yeah.
Well, I think all these arguments about, I mean, I don't care. I don't particularly, they're not, in terms of spy, I love dramas about spies, like most sort of middle class British men, you like read Le Carré and all the rest. I love all that. But I think we're missing is that the most genuinely radical and controversial Bond choice would be to, given Britain and France's enormous collaboration on defence issues, to make the next Bond French. Because he's half Swiss anyway. He's half Scottish, half Swiss. He's not English. Bond isn't English, and went to school in Scotland first, and then goes to Eton. He's a international schoolboy. Yeah. I think getting Jean Dujardin or one of the really grumpy bureaucrats in Le Bureau, the amazing French series created by Mathieu Kassovitz, who directed La Haine. I'm sure you come across it, but it's outstanding. And it's like, I would love to see a really bureaucratic bond, like sort of combining the old Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and like French men arguing about stuff.
You've got to remember, Alastair, the people who own the Bond franchise are trying to make money, so I'm not sure that's really going to fly. But I don't know whether that's more, the idea of a French Bond, is that more or less sacrilegious, Maggie, than Keir Starmer's suggestion that the next Bond should be a woman, which we haven't actually. There's a giveaway. We haven't talked about Labour conference. That says a lot about media in the last week. We're recording this on Friday, and it already feels as though Labour conference happened, a long time ago and didn't quite cut through. I thought Labour actually had not a very good week. Had a moderately decent week in the circumstances, and I think Starmer made some progress, but probably the single thing he said that captured the most attention is the idea that Bond should be a woman. What did you make of it?
I think it's so nonsensical. I just want to cry. If somebody wants to go and write the next great female spy, leader, that's what we want. We want a new character. Who is it? Patricia, what's her name? I mean, there are massive...
Or a male Miss Marple.
Yes, or a male Jane Eyre, as somebody put on Twitter, which I thought was hysterical. But can't we just leave these people alone? You go and write your own lead character. James Bond is James Bond because of the history and who he is. Please leave him alone.
Well, as a distant relative of Margaret Rutherford, who played Miss Marple, leave Miss Marple alone. It's been done.
And on that note,
Starmer needs to stop saying things that he thinks people want to hear. We want to,
Maybe he just believes that the next Bond should be a woman. But I think on that note, we'll wrap up this edition of Press Review. I'm Iain Martin, editor of Reaction. I was joined by Maggie Pagano and Alastair Benn, my esteemed colleagues. Press Review is the show where we review the stories that have grabbed us in the last 7 days or so, with a global focus that illuminate the bigger trends out there. If you're not a subscriber to Reaction on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and also go and visit our site where you can become a member of Reaction and you get all of the brilliant journalism that the team produces. Until next time, thank you for joining us.